Hi, welcome back to Rambling Roxy's Adventures Through History. Thanks for joining me again today. Today we're going to talk about Ohio's early European contact and the beginnings of settlement in Ohio from the Europeans. To get into that, just prior to Europeans entering the Ohio River Valley, the Five Nations, later known as the Six Nations, would start the Beaver Wars in about 1640. And this was among the Native American tribes living in the Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio regions. This was to gain access to animals such as beaver and deer. This is as a result of the fur trade happening in Canada and along the eastern coast. And as I just said, the animal furs were very popular in North America and Europe to make hats and coats for the cold weather. It was still really cold then, and they needed to bundle up to keep warm. And if you had enough money, you could afford furs, especially beaver fur, which was very expensive and super warm. I haven't had the experience of wearing any sort of beaver furs, but I hear that they're very warm. And if you go to any nature centers, you can usually see those pelts out and feel them. They're very thick. They're also rain resistant. So it's kind of like a WeatherTech kind of thing for you. It just kind of, the rain just goes right off you. So it keeps you warm and keeps you dry. And they didn't have any outdoor stores to just go in and buy this stuff. So they needed to make their own coats, gloves, hats, you name it. And they usually used furs because it was the best material that they could use at the time to keep warm. By the mid-1600s, Europeans began to arrive in the Ohio Territory, and interestingly enough, the first Europeans in Ohio were actually the French. It wasn't the English. And the first French explorer was René Robert Cavelier, which I'm pronouncing in the English way, not the French way, because I'm not good at speaking French. He's also known as De La Salle, and he discovered the Ohio River. The French had an extensive trade network in North America, especially in Canada, with the Native American tribes living there. Lake Erie and the Ohio River were very important because most of the Ohio River Valley was forest and there were no roads, so they needed the waterways to conduct trade and move goods. The French would use canoes to take items to trade for furs, and then they would bring the furs back, and then they were able to take them up the river to their settlements in Canada and ship those things back to France. And as you can see, the trade network was fairly large and extensive. Take a good look at this map. It's pretty good size. You can see there was a lot of trade going on during this time period. And it's kind of hard to put an exact number on the fur trade in the United States. I've not been able to find any good numbers on the actual total economic cost of the fur trade, but to kind of give you a reference on how important it was, one of the first multimillionaires in the United States in the 1700s, not the 1600s, was John Jacob Astor, and he made his money from the fur trade. So that kind of tells you how important it was and how much money there was to be made from it. The French were generally just interested in trade with trading outposts and not really settling the land to live on and grow crops. So they had a better relationship with the Native American tribes than the English did at the time because they weren't trying to take land and use it for other purposes. However, sometimes the French get looked at kind of with what I call rose-colored glasses because they didn't take land. So we kind of paint them in this light that they were really good people and they just were wanting to trade and they didn't do anything bad. However, to maintain trade contacts, many times they pitted tribes against each other, and they committed acts to intimidate tribes into trade. So the French weren't entirely innocent in this whole fur trade ordeal. They weren't just helping Native American tribes get richer. They were often taking a lot of resources and not not always doing it with the best business practices. So they were not really the nice, peaceful traders that they sometimes get painted as. They were building and protecting a huge industry. In the 1770s, a beaver hat cost 21 shillings, or about 2 times a week's wages for a normal laborer. So just kind of think of whatever someone makes weekly for doing an unskilled labor job today, and times that by 2, and that's kind of what a beaver hat would cost. Regardless, that means that it's not an everyday item that you're going to buy. It's definitely a luxury item, and people were wanting to be able to get into that trade. So this attracted many people into the trading, and many fur traders that actually came into the wilderness set up traps of their own in hopes of trying to trap some of these animals on their own. And it wound up being pretty important, and it was a lot of money and enough to start a war over. The fur trade caused a lot of problems between the Native Americans, different tribes, and it also caused problems for the local ecosystems. Up until the 1800s, beavers were hunted and trapped almost into extinction. And beavers can be very important in dam building because they like to cut down trees and make their little houses. And they make dams, which can make their own ponds and lakes and natural areas. And they're very important to an ecosystem. Every animal is important and has its role to play. And keep in mind that North America was very rich in natural resources at this time. Now, shortly after this time period not after, but during this time period with the French doing all their fur trading in Ohio, the English were not to be outdone. They were like, wow, they're making a lot of money in Ohio trading all this fur. We should get in on this action. And even though the Ohio Territory, as you can see on this map, was claimed by France, as much as you can claim any land for a specific group at that time. In 1748, the Ohio Company was established in Virginia by both Virginians and Englishmen. The Virginians were people who were already living in Virginia at the time, but they were mostly people of English descent. Their goal was to start an English settlement in Ohio and promote trade, which we will get into more about the Ohio Company and its role in the French and Indian War, plus its role in establishing the first permanent settlement in Ohio, which was Marietta. Thank you for tuning in. Please hit subscribe so that way you can hear more of my ramblings coming up, and thank you.